Welcome to this explainer. Today, we're unpacking the latest insights from the Macro Butler's weekly newsletter, titled A World on Borrowed Time. We're going to deconstruct the systemic risks literally baked into America's debt-fueled consumer economy, and more importantly, reveal how sophisticated investors can actually position their portfolios for the inevitable invoice. Let's get right to it.
Here's our roadmap for today. We'll start with the debt magic trick, move on to the 4 pillars of debt, check out rising rates and delinquencies, look into the generational automation trap, and wrap up with the macro investment playbook.
All right, Section 1. The debt magic trick. Understanding financial time travel. Let's just strip away all the financial jargon and look at the true ancient nature of borrowing.
I love this quote from the source material because it really hits the nail on the head. Debt is basically humanity's oldest magic trick, enjoying money today and praying your future self figures it out later. I mean, it's essentially this beautiful act of financial optimism. Whether we're talking about ancient Mesopotamian farmers trading grain on clay tablets, or modern consumers financing a $90,000 pickup truck over 7 years, the fundamental illusion hasn't changed a bit. A lender hands over cash, and the borrower promises to pay it back, plus a fee for taking on that risk.
And that fee? Well, that's the interest rate. Think of interest rates as the financial system's covered charge. Lenders demand this compensation because, let's face it, time passes, inflation eats away at purchasing power, and sometimes borrowers just vanish like shared streaming passwords. Now, when this cover charge is low, assets inflate wildly, and financing that luxury SUV seems like a totally reasonable idea. But when the cover charge gets high, the music stops, borrowing slows down, bubbles deflate, and suddenly absolutely everyone remembers how to stick to a budget.
So the absolutely crucial point here for any investor is distinguishing between 2 vastly different types of borrowing. First, you've got investment debt. This kind actually has the decency to try making you richer in the future. You borrow to build a business or buy productive assets that create cash flow. Basically, you're planting a tree. Consumption debt, on the other hand, is just financial time travel. It lets you enjoy tomorrow's paycheck today on depreciating lifestyles, like, say, financing a super expensive cocktail under a palm tree. One builds wealth while the other slowly destroys it.
Moving on to Section 2, 4 Pillars of Debt, the American Dream Subscription Service. Let's see how this all builds into the actual architecture of our modern consumer economy.
Our source identifies 4 massive pillars of debt holding this whole thing up. Check this out. The mortgage finances the house you barely leave because you're working so hard to pay for it. The auto loan funds the car you use to drive to the job that pays for the house. Credit cards? They cover everything your salary can no longer handle. And then student loans buy the prerequisite degree you needed for the job in the very first place. When you put it all together, these pillars have essentially transformed the American dream into a perpetual, highly leveraged subscription service.
Just look at this data. Total debt balances are nearing a mind-boggling $19 trillion. $19 trillion. And mortgages alone make up about $12 trillion of that pie. Now, what's really fascinating here is this lock-in effect created during the 2020 to 2022 housing boom. Millions of homeowners locked in crazy low sub-3% rates. Fast forward to today, with rates jumping, and they're practically glued to their houses. I mean, moving now would mean swapping a bargain mortgage for a monthly payment that feels like a luxury car lease.
But beyond housing, the consumer reality check is honestly pretty stark. People are routinely financing $40,000+ vehicles on 7-year terms, literally turning a depreciating asset into a rolling monthly subscription. On top of that, Americans are carrying over $1 trillion in revolving credit card debt, often at what feel like loan shark rates above 20%. Oh, and nearly $2 trillion is locked up in student loans. When households are forced to finance basic groceries and gas with credit cards, that's a huge red flag signaling an economy running purely on overdraft protection, not real growth.
All right, Section 3, Rising Rates and Delinquencies. The engine sputters. Let's examine the exact catalyst that kicks in when the cost of maintaining this massive subscription suddenly spikes.
It really all starts with the credit score. The FICO score essentially acts as the financial system's social rating. It beautifully, or maybe brutally, reinforces the system. Those with high scores get cheaper credit, which makes life easier, while simultaneously trapping lower-tier borrowers in these expensive, inescapable debt cycles. You drop below a 600 and you're going to be paying completely exorbitant rates just for everyday necessities.
Now, notice the rapid spike in this recent data. Delinquencies are basically the engine noise you hear right before your car totally breaks down.
When missed payments start rising across student debt, auto loans, and credit cards all at the exact same time, it's a massive warning sign. It tells us plain as day that households are no longer borrowing confidently to grow their lifestyle, they are borrowing desperately just to survive.
So what's the root cause of all this pressure? Well, it's the U.S. Treasury yield. As the government runs these massive deficits, it acts like a giant vacuum cleaner, sucking up global savings and just flooding the market with bonds. Economists like to call this crowding out, but for the average consumer, it just means that as the 30-year Treasury yield climbs, the cost of their mortgages, their car loans, and their credit cards inevitably skyrockets right alongside it.
Which brings us to Section 4, the generational automation trap, AI meets debt. We're injecting a brand new, highly disruptive variable into this whole system. Young Americans today are entering adulthood carrying immense student debt into a job market that is, frankly, shifting beneath their feet. I mean, think about it. What happens when you borrow 60 grand for a degree, only to find out that an artificial intelligence algorithm can suddenly perform half of your entry-level white-collar tasks faster, cheaper, and without ever asking for an oat milk latte?
Unlike past technological revolutions that mainly replaced manual labor, AI is actively automating analysts, junior lawyers, and coders. You can see it right here. Employment across key tech industries has effectively flatlined since the release of ChatGPT in late 2022. This creates a really dangerous feedback loop for younger generations. Unstable income, rising debt, and relentless technological disruption all colliding at once.
Finally, Section 5, the macro investment playbook, positioning for the invoice. So how do we actually navigate this mess?
For high net worth individuals and institutional investors, the million-dollar question is how to trade this shifting macroeconomic landscape. The old 60-40 portfolio religion, which, worked beautifully during 40 years of falling rates, is officially dead. Survival today dictates a completely new playbook. First up, you've got to avoid long-duration government bonds. These massive government deficits turn so-called safe assets into literal financial landmines. Second, it's time to rotate into scarce, real assets, like gold, to protect yourself against currency debasement. Third, heavily underweight or just outright short consumer discretionary stocks. Think retail, travel, restaurants, because these heavily indebted consumers will be forced to redirect that spending toward just servicing their debt. And finally, favor investments tied to skilled trades. Electricians, plumbers, builders, they're becoming incredibly scarce and, at least for now, are totally immune to AI automation.
Let's quickly summarize the key takeaways from our analysis today. Debt is simply the art of spending tomorrow's income today. While investment debt can build wealth, consumption debt slowly and surely destroys it. We're looking at a global economy that has become entirely dependent on debt just to keep asset prices artificially high. So as the era of cheap money fades into the rear view, wealth preservation absolutely demands a strict focus on tangible, unprintable, real assets.
The crucial point is this. America's debt problem isn't just some theoretical debate anymore. It is accumulated consequence. This systemic debt isn't going to just magically disappear. It's either going to be inflated away quietly or defaulted upon dramatically. So, we leave you with this final thought. When an empire spends decades borrowing from the future, how exactly is your portfolio positioned to survive when the future finally sends the invoice? To navigate this crisis with exclusive, boardroom-level guidance, you need to contact the Macro Butler at info@themacrobutler.com. And definitely visit their website at https://themacrobutler.com/today. Thanks so much for joining me on this explainer, and I'll see you next time.